Okay, so we're at 2 after the top of the hour, so I'd like to welcome all of you to the April IIIF Community Call. If you haven't attended one of these calls before, we have this ongoing meeting for the entire IIIF community. So anyone who's interested in IIIF, a practitioner, a researcher, and other interested parties to hear about new and interesting implementations, to hear updates, news from the consortium, and other things of interest. Today, we are welcoming the team from the American Revolutionary Geographies Online project, which includes folks from the Boston Public Library, Leventhal Map and Education Center, and the George Washington Presidential Library at Mount Vernon. And before I hand it over to them, I just want to give a very brief news update, which is that registration is open for the 2024 annual conference in Los Angeles. There's a link in there in the agenda. The other thing I want to point out is that we have added an optional tour of the Huntington Library, Botanical Gardens, and Art Museum. They are a IIIF member, and they're about 45 minutes from where we'll be in UCLA. If you want to sign up for that, transportation is provided from UCLA to the Huntington and back, and you'll get to spend a lovely afternoon there, touring their imaging center and then also seeing the Gardens and Art Museum. Okay, and with that, I am going to turn it over to Garrett Nelson and Alexandra Montgomery. After their presentation, we'll do some Q&A. So if you have questions, you can put it in the chat or save it for later and you can unmute and ask.
Great, thanks, Caitlin. It's really nice to be here. I think of all the potential audiences that we could be presenting in front of, the IIIF community is probably one of the most important and dearest to our hearts. Not just because the Argo project sort of relies on IIIF for a lot of its technical implementation, but I really think the sort of spirit of the project is really closely aligned with what I know a lot of you care about, making visual collections work across institutions and kind of providing new sorts of experiments between institutional research and collections and users on the other side of the internet. So I'm Garrett Nelson. I'm the president head curator here at the Leventhal Map and Education Center. We're technically an independent research and education nonprofit located inside of the Boston Public Library. We care for the library's map collection, and then we do extensive public programming, educational programming, digital programming around maps and geography. I'm joined by Dr. Alexandra Montgomery at the Washington Library at Mount Vernon. Dr. Montgomery is the project lead on Argo down there. Hi, Ala.
Hi, hello.
And also tuning in from our larger project team is Emily Bowe from the Leventhal Center and Henry Kemp from the Washington Library. So what we thought we'd do today is I'm going to give a very brief kind of institutional introduction to the Argo project. I'm then going to turn it over to Alexandra to talk more about sort of why are we doing this? What's interesting about it from a historian's perspective, from a curatorial perspective, and then after that, we'll talk a little bit about the technical architecture of how we build this thing. We're about halfway through the initial grant project at this point, so there's lots still to come. And I want to make sure that we save plenty of time for conversation with this group. We're really curious to hear what you all think, how what we're doing can be useful to the rest of you. Certainly if you have suggestions or future partners that we might want to reach out to. So to zoom out a little bit, the genesis of this project actually began before any of us were at either of these two institutions. Circa 2016, the Leventhal Center ran a project centered around a traveling exhibition on the American Revolutionary War period that involved collecting digitized maps from about a dozen institutions in the US and Europe. At the time, that meant actually acquiring their imagery, licensing that imagery, inking complicated agreements with these dozen institutions to bring their collections into our local portal here at the Leventhal Center. There was a big success. The collections were widely used, but actually became the germ of a much larger project, which was to build the Leventhal Center's entire digital collections repository. And what that meant was we were left without a AmRev subject-focused web presence. We had all of this AmRev material collection stuff ensconced within a much larger collections repository with many, many thousands of other materials. Another kind of spark for this was one of those key collections that was in that exhibition project, the Richard H. Brown collection, was gifted to Mount Vernon and became one of the foundational cartographic collections at the Washington Library. So in 2020, the two institutions started a conversation with one another to build some common digital infrastructure around first those dozen partner institutions that already existed from the earlier project, and then to expand on it, bringing in new partners, bringing in new curatorial and interpretive material to create what we hope to be the sort of one-stop shop for digital research on the geography of the late 18th century in North America. It's the project so far has been generously supported by a grant from the U.S. National Archives, NHPRC, and it's really a joint enterprise between the two institutions. We're working really closely together, bringing the kind of map and digital strength here at the Leventhal Center together with the curatorial and subject strength that's found at the Washington Library on the American Revolution period. So I'm going to turn it over to Alexandra to say a little bit more about, why this is exciting to users, to researchers, to librarians, to curators. And then at the end, we'll get more into the where's IIIF in this, how did we build it, and then turn it over for questions and conversations after that.
Sure. Thanks, Garrett. So for those of you who have not had the opportunity, the website is argomaps.org. Maybe I'll just put that in chat. Argo Maps. And as Garrett already said, stealing my line a little bit, we think of it as a one-stop map shopping portal for all of your 18th century map needs. And to give you just a little bit more background on what the thematic content of the site is, it's focused on maps of North America, sort of any scale, created between 1740 and 1800. So we have a pretty tight thematic focus. We have a reasonably tight geographic focus, certainly a tight timeline focus, which allows us to build this out as a really specific thematic portal, which is exciting for a number of reasons. But from the perspective of institutions, one of the things that we've heard is it's a way for institutions who are not focused on the 18th century, who are not focused on maps, to give those aspects of their collection, to provide a higher platform for those aspects of their collection, which is especially interesting and important as we're coming on to this 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. This is a way for institutions who don't necessarily have that in-house 18th century American Revolution or maps expertise to make sure that those parts of their collection, often very exciting parts of their collection, get some of the shine that is just impractical to give them on a sort of institution-specific platform. Right. So this is leveraging that IIIF, leveraging a multi-institutional approach to create these thematic platforms where lots of different institutions can come together and put those maps in conversation with one another. So we have a couple of different features on this site, which maybe I'll just talk up a little bit. I think it'd be helpful if I shared my screen, maybe. I see Garrett nodding. So
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Let me just close some things here. And I will. Great. Okay, so can everyone see this?
Yes.
Good.
Great. So as you can see, the way that the site is organized is giving folks a number of different ways in. One of the things we're really proud of about Argo is that it's not just a collections portal. We also provide a number of interpretive and sort of additional value-added layers for exploring individual maps. So you can see in the story section here, we have some posts ranging from sort of meta posts about the Argo portal itself. This is a really great academic leaning blog post about one particular surveyor mapmaker. And then the third one that you see just in the sort of top three, there are lots more if you click through to view all, is a interactive built by one of our interns about the Yorktown campaign. We also have a number of different thematics that are built. Some of them are built on the metadata coming to us from institutions. Some of them are additional metadata layers that we've added on top of it. And then we also have this timeline view, which I am personally extremely excited by. This is based off of my own experience as an academic, finding it surprisingly difficult to find maps about specific events. So that's kind of our solution to that. So you can go down here. American Revolution is sort of the most built out. If you're looking specifically for the Battle of Bunker Hill, as you can see, we've got 33 maps on that. They all kind of pop out nicely over here. And also in the side, you can see which collection they're coming from, which allows you to see some of the diversity of the different collections that we're pulling from. So there's the Richard Brown collection here, Library of Congress, New York Historical Society, and of course the Leventhal Center. And then the final way in is this view my map view, which allows you to use a slider to select by different types of scale. You can zoom in on the map. Again, just trying to make this as user-friendly as possible, provide lots of different ways into these maps that would not be possible on a single institutional platform. So that's just a little taste. Again, argomaps.org. We'll go back over here. But that's sort of the high-level highlights of the site and some of the things that are exciting about it to us. So maybe I will kick it back over to Garrett to talk a little bit more specifically about how IIIF plays into all of this.
Yeah, thanks, Ala. And just to echo some of what Ala said as well, you know, there's really like a kind of syncretic goal here, right? Which is to put institutions of very varying sizes on the same level, right? So we have collections in Argo that are well known to researchers, that have thousands of maps and dedicated map curators. And we also have plans to bring in much smaller institutions that may have, you know, even 1 or 2 maps and no standalone digital infrastructure of their own. So this is useful to the institutions because it puts this kind of format map expertise as well as the topical 18th century stuff on a single playing field. And it's really useful for researchers to have these kinds of materials in one place. We can maybe talk a bit more about that at the end, but if you're not familiar with maps, they're very complicated objects that range from manuscript one-off maps where there really is only one copy in existence to tiny state changes where it's really helpful to compare, you know, the version that's at Leventhal to the version that's at Mount Vernon to another version. And so having those all in one spot rather than having to go to a dozen or 24 or 50 different collections repositories offers a huge benefit to the end user.
Similarly, just to jump in on that, Garrett, another way that it's helpful is just because of the vagaries of time, you have things that were once one coherent collection or created by one map maker that have been split up into multiple institutions. So Argo also provides a way to reunite some of those collections in a virtual space that have been physically disconnected without threatening, you know, custody or the very important integrity of physical collections.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm going to say a few things to kind of technically about how the Argo project is built right now and how it leverages the power of IIIF. And then I'll say a little bit about what we're still hoping to do in the remainder of the grant project and then in the future as we continue to maintain and improve the site. So I put together a little kind of flow chart that explains a little bit about how we build Argo. And I want to say at the front, some of the operational principles that we had in designing this were, A, we didn't want to stand up a lot of complicated one-off infrastructure simply for Argo. We didn't want to run new servers. We didn't want to obligate the full digital services power of our 2 institutions to run Argo. And we also didn't want to rewrite what we already had. So we've got a collections portal here at the Leventhal Center, but we didn't want to, you know, dig into that code and pull it apart and rewrite it specifically for Argo. Similarly, Mount Vernon runs on Content DM, and so, you know, we didn't want to get into a vendor question of having them build something specifically for us. So what we decided was we really wanted this model of Argo being a kind of interpretive skin on top of the collections, something that was light and easy to build, easy to host, that would not, you know, if Argo breaks, the underlying collections don't break. So really seeing it as this sort of interaction and presentation layer. So what happens in Argo is, you know, we have our partner collections who have their own digital infrastructure of whatever kind, right? This ranges from huge institutions that have excellent standards compliant digital infrastructure all the way to small institutions that might have their collections on like a WordPress site or maybe not even that. And what we do is we bring in metadata and imagery from the partner collections And we host all of that in our repository of record, which is the Digital Commonwealth infrastructure. Digital Commonwealth is a federation of Massachusetts institutions. It's based here at the BPL. The Leventhal Center is one of the core partners of Digital Commonwealth, supported both by the BPL and other institutions here in Massachusetts. For those who are curious, it's running primarily on solar and blacklight, and the IIIF services are provided by a Cantaloupe server. So we bring in those partner collections. If we're bringing in a partner collection that has their own good IIIF services, all we do to acquire their imagery is get their manifest URL for the collection record. If they don't have IIIF, we do still take their imagery so that we can serve it as IIIF, and so we use our IIIF services where none are available at the host institution. That's something I want to put a pin into to come back to think about how do we support smaller institutions that are maybe not ready to create their own IIIF infrastructure. What are some opportunities for doing that? So maybe in the future, we don't have to do it for them. Digital Commonwealth then provides all of the sort of hard underlying infrastructure for Argo. It provides a metadata API for the collections. It provides a search API for querying the collection. And then on top of that, we add a couple of things. We merge in some subject-specific curatorial metadata that includes tags and themes and some of these things that Ala was describing, right? You know, the Argo curatorial team is going through and looking for things that are interesting to map researchers and adding stuff that would not go into kind of traditional library collections metadata. We're also adding our own original interpretive content, essays, interactives. We didn't look at, there's a really amazing section on cartographer, basically biographies, talking about the people who were making these maps and their relationships with one another and their relationships with institutions. And that all bundles up into a static app that we deploy to Netlify. So it brings in all of the stuff. We make duplicative copies of the metadata records, and then the deployed version of Argo is live querying Digital Commonwealth for some things. It's live querying Digital Commonwealth when a user executes an arbitrary search. It's live querying Digital Commonwealth for IIIF services that are with us. And wherever a partner collection has their own IIIF services, it's querying the image services from that partner collection. We also, and this is a sort of, might seem minor, but we see it as a really important piece of the project, is that we point users back to the permalink at the partner collection, right? So we really want users to be able to realize that this thing is at the Clements Library, this thing's at the British Library, this thing's at New York Public Library, right? So if they want to go and physically make a reference appointment, they can go and see it there. And of course, those partners are maintaining their own kind of permissions layers. They're, you know, choosing their own path about how downloadable or how reusable the images are. But to the kind of end user of Argo, it all looks like it's in one same place. We also on Argo have bolted in the ability to jump over to all maps, which I'll do a little live demonstration of in a little bit. All maps, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a IIIF-based georeferencing tool. We're actually supporting all maps at the Leventhal Center through another grant, an NEH grant. So it's two of our kind of IIIF projects coming together in one. But it's a great example of the sort of tool that probably wouldn't make sense to implement if you didn't have a large map collection, right? If you had one or two maps in your collection, it's unlikely that you would add in a kind of all maps plugin. If those maps are in Argo, it's very easy to pass them over to all maps as a IIIF service. We at the Leventhal Center have used like every static site generator under the sun. We know the strengths and weaknesses of all of them. Recently, Astro has become our kind of favored framework for building content-rich sites. I'm happy to get further into the weeds of why we chose Astro or how we built it and some of the compromises between, for instance, SEO and the build chain and hydrating some things on the client side to make it a little bit more lightweight. But overall, I would say we're big fans of Astro, and it works really well for projects like these. Inside of the Astro app, we're bringing in some modular stuff. Like right now, we're using the really wonderful Clover IIIF React component as the viewing module for collections objects. And then, of course, All Maps is its own standalone web app that's maintained by the All Maps team. So I wanted to actually bring Argo back up and just give a little bit of a, like, when you're looking at it as a user, if you had no idea about what's beneath the hood, sort of like how those pieces are all coming together. So, go. I should say that the code is public. As part of this project, we really want to be building things that are repurposable and potentially useful in other contexts. I'll drop a link into the Zoom of the Git repository in case anyone wants to poke at it at all. Again, kind of zooming out into the sort of so what question, we feel pretty strongly that this model of, you know, collection portals on top of collections that are driven by theme and topic are really exciting for users, right? It's very daunting to show up at a collection portal with just a search query bar and it says search 100,000 records and where are you supposed to start? So we've designed Argo in a way that presumably you could rip out all of the AmRev and the map guts and you could stand up the same static site built on the code that we've done for whatever, right? Like Shakespeare folios or, you know, pick your topic or subject area and do the same sort of thing. In terms of kind of like related IIIF art in this space, I've spent a bit of time looking at the Canopy project, which I think is a really cool, similar type of example, right? How do you stand up a mini site or a mini portal based around a particular theme and a particular group of IIIF collections? So anyways, going back to the Argo portal, you know, if you were to start here and we were to query something like Boston, we're sending a live query at that point to the Digital Commonwealth Search API, which is then returning results to us. We're getting all of these many results about Boston from many different collections. And if I pick one, like for instance, at the Clements Library, I'm going to get the catalog record. This metadata is coming in all from the collections repository, Digital Commonwealth, but the imagery here is live loading from Clements because the Clements/University of Michigan have their own very good IIIF service. So in this case, we're live loading IIIF imagery from Clements. We can click back over here to the original record at the Clements Library, as well as, for instance, get the manifest right from, this is, I don't know if you can see my URL bar, but this manifest is loading right from the Michigan server. We actually haven't tagged the Clements Library collection yet. It's our newest ingest, but if we had, you would see our original non-library metadata here. So things like, for instance, this would probably be tagged with survey or fortifications because it shows those types of features. Those are all things that primarily Ala and Henry are working through, basically every single object to give it some additional themes. I'll go back, for instance, to
the Clements tags are done. They're just in quality control right now. Yeah.
So when an object does have tags, for instance, like this one in our collection, then you have an additional layer of discovery, right? So we could go to houses and property here, and now we have maps from all of the collections that show houses and property. This is particularly useful for surfacing things that usually are not included in library metadata, like indigenous peoples. Again, you know, our team knows how to look at maps and look for these sorts of things. So this is a great starting point if you're doing either, you know, a high school project or a deep research monograph on the representation of indigenous peoples in cartography of this period. The last thing I wanted to just briefly do is show how we can jump over to all maps. I'm not going to do a full all maps demonstration here. I know there's been a couple of other kind of all maps presentations to IIIF, and in fact, we're going to be doing some all maps IIIF at the conference in Los Angeles. But Clements itself has not implemented, a built-in link to all maps for georeferencing from their collections portal. And since we have their manifest, it's really easy for us to generate this link and jump over to all maps. If you haven't used all maps, I'm not going to do it live here, but we could probably georeference this map in about 5 minutes and get a really nice map overlay if we did it. I think this one, yeah, so this is the BPL map, and this one has been georeferenced. If it has been georeferenced, it live loads that status from the all map server, and we can jump over here and see it in the all maps viewer, and we get the map overlay version of that. There's Boston before it was filled in. I think I'm going to leave it. Maybe the last thing I will say before opening up to a broad discussion and questions is we also are trying to expose these sort of collections as data types of possibilities for power users, right? So within the collection records, we're not only exposing the manifest, but also the ability to get right into the JSON metadata. So this is just a raw JSON output of all the library metadata fields. And those are then being duplicated in the source of the actual portal. So for people who are interested in looking at collections as data, could come over here and point them to content maps. And each one of these is a duplicated JSON record from the collections repository. So these are places where we would point, power users who might want to do things like tally up how frequently does, a particular map maker appear across different collections, or, how well represented are certain sub eras within the larger 1740 to 1800 period. We've tried to structure everything that we do as pretty clean data. So for instance, these tags are also available as pretty simple JSON records. We haven't yet sort of worked with a lot of power users in that way, but the goal is to make this stuff available in case people wanted them. In terms of sort of things we are doing for the future, that you can kind of group them into 3 buckets. One is we're just bringing in new collections. So our goal is to roughly double the number of objects that are in the portal, as well as the number of partner collections that are represented. 2 is to add more and more interpretive material so that it's not just a bunch of collections records, it's also stories, essays. Both of our education teams are working on lesson plans and K-12 content. So, ways in, right? Not just starting from a catalog of items, but animating that catalog of items with interpretation. And then the third is to continue experimenting with some technical possibilities. So classics, kind of scrolly telling, zoom in, zoom out. We've talked about trying to add built-in support for annotations following the IIIF annotation spec. And, we'll see how much we get to by the end of the grant period, but other things on our mind are other kind of forms of interactive presentation with the map collections. So, Ala, anything you want to add before we turn it over to conversation?
Nope, that was all very good. Just to flag to everybody that I'm here as an 18th century content expert, and yeah, the IIIF questions are better answered by Garrett. But
and I should also add, we are really lucky to have other people in our universe, the Digital Commonwealth team here at the BPL, repository services team, do amazing work. We couldn't do this without the infrastructure of that Digital Commonwealth portal. So if there's anything kind of super technical questions about the repository, I'm also happy to pass it on or connect with those folks. I saw two. Maybe should we pick some of the questions from the
I was
chat?
just going to say, I give people usually, I try and wait them out and see who will break and unmute. But there are some questions in the chat that we can start with. So we'll start at the bottom, we'll move up. Where is the webpage shown earlier that had the slider for filtering by scale? So that's an easy one. Maybe we can.
Yeah,
that's
so
just on the main homepage. Yeah.
That's on the homepage. I can open it back up. And that's actually, I would say, a fairly quick build. We went back we went around quite a few different times around how did we want to do map view. As I'm sure all of you know, a lot of map view interfaces, I think, are a little bit overwhelming. And so we really wanted to foreground this, like a map of the hemisphere is going to look a lot different than a map of a fort. This is where are we, Fort Ticonderoga here. So using that, using this sliding scale to show the types, basically scalar types of maps. And this is really just doing some simple math on the bounding box metadata when it's available. It's an area where we've thought maybe we should do a little bit more UI tweaking for how exactly that works. But right now, you scrub through basically various scale types and then click through to the map itself. It is also only as good as the metadata, of course, and we do, as partner ingest flows through Mount Vernon and Leventhal, and then finally into Digital Commonwealth, we do a number of kind of metadata checks and bring everything into conformance with our standards, but we are not doing a lot of original new cataloging. So for instance, right now, we're not adding bounding boxes to collections.
I have a comment and a question.
Yeah.
The comment says, the slider is wonderful. I really love it. And the question is, you mentioned bounding boxes. So is this coming from the original repositories, the bounding boxes, or is this related to all maps and you just grab the bounding box from all maps?
Yeah, so we don't grab spatial metadata from all maps yet. That's definitely something that we want to do. And actually, we know we already can do a little bit with some BERT's tools. Right now, it's grabbing bounding boxes from the cataloging metadata, and it's only present where that cataloging metadata exists. But yeah, the possibility of using all maps annotations to improve the spatial metadata is for sure something that we want to do.
So I have a question, and you may not have this right off the top of your head. What percentage of the maps and items in Argo are coming in with their own manifest from their collection, and how much are you generating?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we really are prioritizing future partners that have IIIF services. Clements was our big first one. So Clements is all got good IIIF services behind it, which meant that we didn't have to acquire their imagery. We have upcoming partnerships with the John Carter Brown Library, Bibliothèque Nationale de France, both of whom have IIIF services. So as we go through the intake process, that's one of the things that we're looking at, right? We probably wouldn't take on right now a huge collection that didn't have a IIIF service. We definitely will take on small collections that aren't IIIF powered. And as I said, I think it's to put a pin in it. One of our open questions has been, when a collection approaches us and wants to be a part, but they haven't implemented IIIF. We'd love to, what's a great place to get started? Where, who could you talk to? We always point them to the consortium and some of the resources available. But we don't have the internal capacities to sort of like set up a IIIF infrastructure for partners. So we're trying to help, like, what's the easiest lift, especially for some of these tiny institutions that don't have any technical services people on their staff.
To answer the as a percentage question, right now it's about a third, a little under a third of things are being pulled in rather than being generated by us. That percentage is going to change dramatically once we've finished the intake of the John Carter Brown materials, which are in progress, and the BNF collection. So by this time next year, that percentage is going to look very different.
Yeah. Matthias?
Who is able to create the stories? Is it just you, or is it everybody who can visit your website? So the entire world.
Ala, do you want to answer this one?
Oh, right now it's just us. Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't think that we have explored the possibility of opening that up to everybody. That's a really interesting idea. As of right now, it's fairly tightly controlled. Mostly what we would like right now is to start working more with the actual partner institutions to start generating some of those stories, because everything that's up there, mostly everything that's up there right now, was generated by the Argo team or our Argo team partnerships. So I think the first step is to start working more closely with our partner institutions, and then maybe broach the terrifying prospect of opening it up to everyone, but we haven't gotten there yet.
And again, on the technical architecture side, we made a decision fairly early on that at least in this initial phase, there's no CMS here, no point and click CMS. So for our publishing workflow, that's fine right now. We're publishing stuff internally, and we have enough people on our team that can format stuff basically as Markdown, so that it works for us right now. We are thinking about in the future, if we have more interns or scholars or other people, that it no longer is practical to have a kind of technical workflow for publication. What would we look at? I'd be curious if people have great suggestions. Storyblock is what we're currently evaluating as a CMS, but if anyone has hot or cold thoughts about the welter of sort of standalone CMSs, we'd love to hear it.
I'm poking a little bit into the direction. What are your users able to do with the wonderful stuff? So can they put an asterisk, a check mark, a comment? Can they store something on their own to review it later or next week, or to present in class? All that stuff. So what are the scenarios that are, to phrase it differently, you mentioned you're only halfway through. So what's up on your agenda for the rest of the project?
Yeah, so again, another relatively early kind of scoping choice was to not have any sort of user authentication system, just again, for technical reasons. We didn't want to get into that. I will say we've actually found here at the Leventhal Center, beyond just the Argo project, that the places where we have built those sorts of features, right, like create an account, create your own lists, star items, actually are not widely used. For instance, we're studying how teachers use our collections, and they tend to just like download images and collect links and make bookmarks, and not use our sort of user authentication services as much. So to keep this project technically simple for the time being, basically a user cannot do anything other than georeference. They can georeference, and that data is stored, but nothing else. We've thought about text annotations, a la Anatorius sort of thing.
I think annotations is the next place we're going to really be pushing into in terms of the tech level.
Yeah.
Do you have your own schema for permalinks? So can I send an email to a friend saying, well, this map on your site is really wonderful?
Yeah, the URL structure is quite permanent, and I actually saw somebody was asking about ARC services. So when we create a record locally in Digital Commonwealth, it gets minted with an ARC identifier. And so we basically replicate those same identifiers in the URL scheme for the Argo collections. And then in the metadata also encodes what we think the collection's permalink is, right? That does change over time. Actually, we were just realizing we need to update the New York Historical Society's permalinks because they have changed. But our permalinks should be pretty stable. Maybe I could dive a little bit deeper into Brittany's question about ingest and pipelines. Right now, what that looks like is basically harvesting metadata from the collection that we're working with, doing curatorial work to decide, what from their collection do we actually want. So we usually start with some broad, like geography and chronology searches in a collection, and then winnow it down to, is this appropriate for Argo? We then rewrite or we basically parse the field names and get them into the format that is the same format we use internally for when we ingest new materials. So it's the same schema as if we digitized a new item here at the Leventhal Center. And then it goes through all of the ingest and checking processes that are standard for us with the repository. We have tested out using OAI. So some Clemens came in as OAI. That usually works pretty well, although the OAI schema sometimes loses certain types of useful metadata fields that we want. And then working with the repository team, if we can match a manifest to the record when it comes in, then we just bring in that manifest URI, we snap a small resolution thumbnail just to store locally. So we have one little teeny image locally in the repository. But then we use the manifest URL to actually provide the high res and deep zoom capability. I hope that sort of answered your question, Brittany. I'm not sure if it did. The short answer is it's not nearly as automatic as like just straight OAI harvesting, right? We have not gotten to the point, and we probably won't get to the point where we would just like put in a bunch of OAI endpoints and run that. There are a few things that we're like a little more careful and curatorial about along the way. But using some OAI field matching has been helpful to us.
Just read Brittany's out loud. So that's super helpful. We've started working on scripts, importing non-IIIF content into our platform since we get a lot of requests for this from our members, but we are not as far in our journey of doing this. So
yeah. And I guess maybe another sort of like thinking institutionally, not just technically, but the way we kind of broach the Argo topic for partner collections is if we have a partner who we know has a good local repository, we know has good IIIF services, we basically tell them that the minimum partnership commitment is literally just saying that, okay, go ahead and do it, right? We know firsthand that it's hard to get institutions to commit their own staff to doing work for an external partner. I get it, like totally makes sense. You know, staff time is precious. So we've tried to design this in a way so that if we know the metadata is good, we know the IIIF service is there, and there's a presumption that basically both are on an open license or a permissive license, then all we're really asking for is the institution's kind of blessing and wherewithal to like go ahead and digitally collect. And then we see that as the sort of floor. And on top of that, you know, institutions can help us select. They can prioritize digitization of their cartographic collections in their own digitization pipeline. And then we also are trying to engage the partners in interpretive content, right? So when they have research fellows or students or class projects or whatever that are looking for a kind of publication platform on topics related to maps and geography in the 18th century, we encourage them to say, well, you know, send material our way. We're thinking ahead to potentially some kind of editorial board format where Argo looks like a collections portal glued together with a you know, almost like an online journal in a way. So that's you know, it's a partnership model where it should have a very low bar for institutions, but also a fairly high ceiling, right? So there's a huge range of possibilities of how people can get involved.
Yeah, just to echo Garrett, it's very important for us that this is a win-win scenario with us and our partners, and that means keeping it as low lift as possible, and really making it a situation where institutions that don't have access can sort of borrow from our expertise, borrow from our staff time to get into this platform, to get into this portal with a relatively low requirement in terms of what they need to contribute. Although also, as Garrett said, we love if people want to do more. That's great. Doing more is great, but definitely never required.
Okay, so Matthias asked, would you consider importing Internet Archive maps?
It's a good question. Now IA finally has a slightly more stable IIIF service. So maybe yes. I think the model though is that we are collecting in partnership with institutions, right? So if an institution was using IA as their kind of repository of record, I think probably yes, an advised yes. If it was just like some internet user had collected a bunch of open source maps from various repositories and put them on their like personal Internet Archive account, I think we'd probably be less likely to do that. Mostly because we really want to preserve this sort of collections of collections model and emphasize to researchers, you can still go and find this at Clements, at BPL, at Mount Vernon, at wherever. So I think there's nothing about the technical architecture of Internet Archive that would prohibit us from bringing stuff in there. Mostly a question of like how are institutions using Internet Archive.
Maybe you need real people on the other end, and Internet Archive has a broad scope. So are they really interested to contribute their stuff to you? Hopefully, yes. But in reality, if there's no one to give an email, a call, a heads up, then it's difficult, I suppose.
And to follow, I see, Matthias, you just asked a question about what do we take from institutions? It's a great question. In this earlier project in 2016, the sort of prior project, we were very careful about what we took because it meant copying and licensing images, right? So that project really only took items that weren't present elsewhere, right? If something was already here at BPL, we wouldn't take that from a partner institution. Now, if a partner does have IIIF, it's meant to be a much more of a kind of union catalog model where we will take everything in the subject domain from that institution, provided they're willing to give it to us. And again, if they've got their own IIIF service, the metadata is trivially small. It's not putting a lot of burden on our internal server capacity. So, we're shunting off the hard part of serving images to them. So for that reason, we're much more dovish about what we collect at this point.
Although to follow up on that, it is still a human-driven process. We still do go through everything and decide whether or not to take it into Argo. Although, yeah, absolutely, especially if it's coming from their own IIIF servers, we err on the side of we want everything.
And again, speaking of like future possibilities, like potentially doing some computational stuff to look at tiny state changes on maps, right? This is one of the only places where you have lots of different, maybe the same, but possibly slightly different maps, right? And, it would be interesting to run like a machine vision project to see if you could detect some of that stuff.
And it's been a while since Garrett and I talked about that aspect of it, so I don't want to talk over him too much or propose anything that he is not comfortable with either. But I'm very enthusiastic about the idea of filtering by state or collapsing searches. So that, yeah.
Yeah, we did the Greek mythology tie-in. We did find there was a letter, I think, from Thomas Jefferson referring to his generation as the Argonauts of America, which was merely a resonant echo of the acronym we chose. So Ben asked about how institutions learn about the possibility of partnering. Do you reach out to them? Are we presenting at conferences? Yes, all of the above. We're doing a lot of like sort of outreach. We know most of the biggest and most important collections that aren't represented yet. So we're pursuing collections, but we're really pursuing collections of very varying sizes. ALA just inked an agreement with a collection that has just about a dozen maps, but we're also pursuing really large ones that have 1,000+ maps. With that said, there's a section of Argo that sort of says, if you're interested in becoming a partner, here's how to get started. And it's really just an initial human conversation with one of us.
Yeah, you raised my hand.
Thanks.
Don't click my link now. It's just for reference what I'm doing in this time frame area. I seem to have the speciality that if there's a book and on page 73 and 345 is a map, I put them into my chronoscope if I like it.
Yeah.
So I'm the unique point where every maps have to go to my background here.
Yeah.
Can you or do you deal with maps inside of books about the American Revolution?
Yeah, and one question has been, do we take those as separate collections records, or right? There are cases where a collection has a whole book digitized and there's one map in that book. We've thought about, okay, well, maybe we'd do that, but we would add a supplemental metadata to say, like, when it shows up in Argo, it should be this, basically this Canvas ID should be the one that you see, so that you don't start with the cover of a book and flip through whatever 200 pages of non-cartographic material to get there.
Maybe the written pages explain something on the map, so it's really relevant to your topics.
Yeah, exactly.
So Andrew asked, what are some of the concerns potential partner institutions have shared with you?
I have to say, we haven't heard a lot of concerns. I think oftentimes it's a sort of like, what do you need from us? Do we have the capacity to do this, right? From we, the partner institution, which is why we've really tried to emphasize this sort of like, if you've got your own digital repository in a good place, like, you don't need to do anything except say that you're okay with us doing this. I think for the institutions that don't have IIIF or don't have a good digital collections repository, and they're small and they don't have a digital team, there's still a kind of high bar of like, how would we ever get there? We've got some WordPress site, or like some places have Omeka without the IIIF plugin. So they basically they don't have all the stuff that they would need to partner with us, and I think that can be a daunting block for them. So we're thinking about, in the future, if we were to apply for the grant funding, could some of that be like sub grants to institutions that need to upgrade their own technical capacity? Yeah, and we always point people to the excellent like IIIF resources for how to get started.
And then perhaps a very human question: who is the us? So how many people are working on Argo behind the scenes?
So the core project team is relatively small. There's about 6 of us, 3 at each institution, working really actively on the project. We're supported by staff at our own institutions in small ways, but it's really this pretty small collaborative team between Leventhal and Mount Vernon. We did engage an external developer to do a lot of the just building the Astro site. And then the partners, what are we at? 16, I think.
We have 24. We have 24 partners, 16 of whom have maps on the site currently.
Yeah, so 16 represented, and a number in the pipeline, and many more in the sort of like, we know we want to work with them. Partner institutions, the representative of the partner could be a curator, it could be a digital collections manager, it could be a library director, right? It really depends on who the stakeholder is at the partner institution.
And Ben Johnston, I just see you asked a question about lesson plans. Those are currently in progress. There are a number of ones that have been completed that are currently being edited. So those are in the near future, will be on the site, and then more planned for further out, but that's actively in the works at the moment.
Volunteers or interns? We don't have any volunteers, or, well, that's not true. Interns, you had some.
We do have interns. Yeah, no, we've been averaging about 1 Argo intern a year over here at the Washington Library.
Yeah.
Washington Library, we do a lot of the content side,
Yeah.
and the curatorial side.
Yeah.
So we do have an intern. Our new Argo intern will be coming in late May. We're very excited, and they've typically helped with things like map tagging, some like lighter map selection, although we tend to not have them do map selection, and just developing content on their own, brainstorming features for the sites. It's always very fun. Yeah,
I think maybe in closing, there's there's both a ton of possibility as well as some potential pitfalls with these kind of cross-institutional projects, right? Matthias, we have 6 people, but none of them are working full-time on Argo.
No,
Most of
Henry
them-
is.
That's true.
Shout out to Henry.
Henry is working almost full-time on Argo, but most of the rest of us, it's like a teeny sliver of many other projects. So, you know, I feel really strongly that these kind of interinstitutional digital collaborations are really powerful, right? Rather than duplicating one another's work between 10 different things at 10 different institutions. There's so much, there's such an advantage to use interoperability as a lever. And of course, like that's why we love IIIF. You know, but then it's also sort of like, okay, every institution has their own priorities, right? Our own 2 institutions are doing a million other things. Of course, these partner institutions are delighted to have their material in Argo, but getting them to have a sort of stake in it long term can be a challenge. I know that's true also of IIIF, right? So I think creating lots of models of how this is really powerful, I think is important for attracting funders. I think it's a great example of like what we can do and we work together. It's not only more cost effective, but it's also probably more interesting to the user and the researcher. And what's our favorite IIIF Slack channel? It's got to be maps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, we have just a couple minutes to wrap up here. So thank you, Garrett and Alexandra. This was wonderful. A lot of great conversation here. If folks want to follow up with you, can I share your emails? So, okay, and clearly you can be found in the IIIF Maps channel. So maybe that's the place to grab you. Thank you again.
I should say that you know the code base that GitHub repository is also open, so you know people should feel free to leave comments or notes in there as well. We'd love to know if anybody like uses it as a model or even just as inspiration. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. This was a delight.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you to the whole IIIF community again. Like huge inspiration for us, and wouldn't be possible without all the work that this group does.
Great.
Cool.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Hi, everybody.